Podcast, the resource for people looking to find their fit in the gaming industry. I'm Steve Radusky, your host, and thanks so much for joining me. Starting a new indie video game studio is something that takes a lot of care, preparation, and when it comes down to it, money. In order to get all of this done, it's going to take a lot of forethought, and really, it may even take focusing on things that are not video games in order to get your feet under you until you can finally launch your major project. Today, our guest is going to talk about some excellent strategies for starting the game studio process and some great business practices that you can use in order to generate some cash flow so that you can finally tackle that major game project that you have in your head and in your heart. And with that, let's jump into the interview. We have a great guest with us on the show today. His name is Roger Walco. Roger is the CEO of Lifeform Entertainment and has well over 25 years experience in the video game industry. Roger, thanks so much for being with us on the show today.
You're welcome, and good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. It's a pleasure. So thanks so much for joining us. And for our listeners that may not be familiar with you or your company, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the industry?
Oh, gosh. You really want all that information?
Wind the way back clock and give us the peaks. How about the peaks?
All right. So, I've always liked making things. And I went off to engineering school, went off to MIT because I liked making things. And I was lucky to have some amazing work and internships while I was in college. And I was never, once I got out, actually happy being a real engineer because once it was adult life, engineering got kind of boring. And so I went back and studied industrial design. And that made me kind of a weird commodity. I was sort of a half artist, half engineer, and very quickly got into the film business, doing some special effects type stuff back when there was regular models to be had, and
right.
I also helped the people who did the Thigh Master invent that damn gadget. So that's a whole hilarious story. I'll tell you later if you want to hear it.
It's your fault.
Yeah, it's my fault. I was there. Anyhow, doing movie stuff pretty much got me into the video game industry right around the time that Doom came out, right around 1992. We started hearing murmurs that there was this new thing called the web and that you could download this really cool game called Doom. And I pretty much jumped into the business there. I'm sure that we'll touch on this later, but it took me many years to learn how to be practical and combine the practical side along with the creative side, because what my business partner John and I were doing at the time was we had an idea for what we called online games, and that people would actually play games together over this new thing, the internet. And we managed to talk an upcoming young executive at Sony into giving us some cash to do some prototypes for this new online gaming thing. And we started doing that, and eventually that sort of division kind of closed down, and they liked us, but we lost our project, and we were like, oh well, dream on. And 6 months or a year later, there was EverQuest, right? So ever since then, I've been on the tails of the next big new cool thing. And after that, we did our own thing for a while, but I had to kind of buckle down. I think my first real gig was at Activision, and kind of worked my way up from there. So here we are. About 2009, after working for a lot of the big players, Activision, Electronic Arts, BioWare, lots of small companies, and doing various startup-y kind of things, I decided that I'd had enough of console games. That the industry's run a certain way, and I tend to operate a little bit of a different way. And so we started Lifeform around 2009, just after the first iPhones came out, and I was lucky to work on one of the very first 3D games for the iPhone, and that got me interested in mobile, and I thought it was the future, and we've been running Lifeform ever since.
So you've been in the gaming industry, video game industry, for quite some time, 25 years. How have you seen it change from when you started to kind of now? What does the landscape look like?
Oh gosh, well, so I think in the old days, right, one person wrote a game. They wrote Star Trek for some mainframe or Zork or whatever. That was it. It was just a programmer, and there was no art, right? But by the time I really came into the industry, there were a variety of different disciplines, coders, artists, whatever, managers, and there was kind of the notion that the lead producer or the lead person was the project director, was the producer, and was the lead designer, essentially. That was a big thing. And I think one of the biggest things I see is that there are so many specializations now, and managers for those specializations. And even within, say, like the art pipeline, you no longer have somebody just building a model and then texturing it. The texturer might be separate. Someone might do the ZBrush work, the normal apps separately from them. So that's a huge thing. And I'm pleased to also see the injection of better management structures. We're not quite there yet, but I like a well-run project. I don't like smoke and mirrors in management, and so it's rewarding to see some of that stuff generally start to happen and be done well.
That's very cool. And what I am seeing is, you have this management model that kind of really started with line production in car manufacturing, and having it start to find its own legs in a software space with Scrum development and agile methods, which I, on the one hand, I like very, very much. And what I like is now as the software industry or the gaming industry is maturing, we're starting to see some more habits of successful product launches or successful project management for the gaming space, which really makes it a bit safer.
Yeah, I like seeing that too. Agree.
And one of the cool things that I would like to point out, one of the things that I've seen change recently in the past 10 years or so is, yes, we have those built-up management models, but we're also, in a way, kind of getting back to that same do-it-yourself entrepreneurial spirit because of the tools that are available.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that can build their own apps without all of the programming skills that it used to take, right?
Yeah, certainly, mobile has done that. The Unity engine has done a lot of that, for sure. We see a lot of that. And that's created a whole new breed of the whole, I'm just going to do this myself and I don't need any project management kind of thing, which, works up to one or two people, right? So
right.
I guess these things go in cycles, and then some of that is good. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I want to kind of transition this topic into Lifeform Entertainment. So you guys have a really cool business model for kind of how you launched and how you got started with your own game studio. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So one of the first things that I said, so basically Lifeform is owned by two business partners. Carlisle is my business partner, and me, Roger. And over the years, there's generally been a team of, I'd say a total team of 3 to 7 people altogether around there. And we've tried to really inject some elements that we missed at other studios we're at. We tried to have, good project and team management so that our people would feel we could run practically and be cost effective, and at the same time not have our guys working nights and weekends and have them be happier. We also, Carlisle brought in a lot of sort of the movie management approach, which is just, I like that. Anyhow, trying to get more on wavelength with your question. Could you?
Sure. So I'll just kind of talk a little bit about that. When we spoke before, when you started your company, you started with a philosophy of helping out other people finish their projects before launching your own major project. Is that true?
Thank you for getting me back on track.
Absolutely.
So one of the first things, I was all talking up to it, and then I was like, I completely spaced on what I was about to say.
I got you covered.
One of the things that, while getting going, I said is the easiest way to lose the money we have in the company and lose our pants is to basically decide that we have the greatest, game idea in the world. That's what every game maker thinks. And we're going to make $1 billion at it, right? It's very expensive to make a game. And with the way the app environment is, it's very risky. Even if you have a really excellent, amazing, and even well-reviewed and loved product, you can disappear easily. And nowadays, there's so much of a huge social media budget required to make something, rise to the top and appear in What's Hot. So we said, let's not do that. Essentially, let's do work for hire for other people for a number of years, and until we have sort of our team stabilized, everybody has stable jobs, and we're feeling kind of more comfortable. And then we can branch out and do some, of course, there's stuff that we wanted to do, but we knew we needed to fuel that with a bit of cash flow. And as far as the work for hire went, it wasn't just like, hey, let's write code for whoever tells us to. We kind of, as a very robust team, as a very strong, we're very strong on the code side, but we're very strong on the design, user interface, and product design side. So we do a lot of design work for people, and my mantra for our clients is kind of, we'll do your product and not just write whatever code you throw us, right? So because of that, people like working with us. We emphasize the customer service aspect to make sure the client's getting what they need, kind of psychoanalyze them to try to extract out of them what they really think that they need, and then we try to design that and then deliver that. So, yeah. It's really cool. Just last year that we started to be like, okay, it's safe for us to get into our own products.
And I think that is really a brilliant strategy, and it's something that most people don't consider when they're thinking about their own game or their own project, which is rent.
Yeah.
And utilities. While you're thinking about your perfect game and you've put $10,000 away and you're going to go off and do that, live off your money and then launch it and have it be successful. Well, rent comes every month, and that $10,000 you're still going to have to pay other people. So where does life happen while you're working on your magnum opus?
Absolutely. And what I would say for all the young game designers out there is, it goes quicker than you'd think, especially when you have employees, right? So it's not just like, oh, you have to sort of suck it up and do this. It's that if you want to, we're not just building a nice spacesuit. We're putting a spaceship on the moon. It's a long-term game, right? You don't want to just get halfway through your game because you think it's neat and barely get it out. Once it's out, the support starts there, and you're going to want to do other products. So really, you're actually doing yourself a favor by planning your garden out correctly, right?
Absolutely. So what is the kind of project that you started with on your mind that you then, after 4 years, were able to start working on?
Okay. So I'll kind of preface that by saying that we saw a need out there in the market, and we had an idea for a whole line of products that could kind of fulfill that need. And loosely, the first product we do mouthful. Start over again. The first step in that direction we did was a product called Iron Atlas, but there's actually sort of a series of products that go with it. And essentially the idea of that, do you want me to just kind of go on about this, Stephen?
Yeah, just a little bit, because I'd like to give our listeners kind of an idea of the concept, and then we'll be able to talk about some of its challenges and successes as we go forward.
Right, so overall our idea was that, hey, there's lots of console games out there, there's PC games, there's plenty of app games being made. Let's not do that, right? Even if there's lots of them that we'd love to make if we had the time and money, but not necessarily a smart angle to play. There's many people playing that game. However, we took a good look at some other areas. We have really deep roots in the tabletop gaming industry, Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer, all Pathfinder, all those kind of traditional games, cards games, board games, jigsaw puzzles, role-playing games. And Eric, who works for me, Eric Cagle, was in that industry for a long time before he got into the app space, and so he brings a lot of that to the table. And we said, that whole industry kind of really wants to get into the app space in a way, but they don't have the tools to do it. So let's make that. So short version is, we started seeing that the first thing that happens with traditional games, which are hugely on the rise lately, right? Board games are just really popular and continuing to grow. It's not as small of a niche as one might think. Is that
it's exploding now.
So the first thing that happens when somebody converts a board game or whatever is they make essentially a video game out of it, right? If you play, Scrabble or something with a friend or play Words with Friends, it's not really exactly the same. And if you play something like Monopoly or something, it's really not the same at all. There's no dice rolling. You can't move your little piece and go, Jimmy, you can't put your piece there because you only rolled a 4. It's sort of more automated and turn-based like a video game, so it loses some kind of special magic. So we started saying, hey, we could help out everybody we know in the publishing space, and we could help ourselves out by creating sort of an Amazon Kindle-like device, well, not device, a piece of software that would let people download and play these games on their big screen TV. So you might think it's kind of like Amazon Kindle, but with a playable front end, something that would let you deal cards, move game pieces, and we very quickly came up with a system that was originally called MapForge in its early technology demo, where any number of people could connect with their iPhones or Android phones to a TV through an iPad, and anytime anybody moved a game piece on any of the devices, it would move real time for everybody else. And you could only move your game piece. And so we right away found out this was incredibly fun for people. People are not used to seeing the kind of touch-based real-time interaction. In fact, we didn't even have to put a game board up. People would just have fun running circles around each other on the TV. You know, it was amazing. So we said, this is cool. Let's attach like an in-app store to this where, you know, you can buy whatever licenses we have for games. You know, it might be a jigsaw puzzle to play with grandma across the country, or a jigsaw puzzle to play with your kids sitting around the TV in your living room, or both. Or it might be, you know, Dungeons and Dragons or something. And so a lot of the publishers we approached were looking for, I'm trying to be very brief about this, we're looking for a way to revitalize their revenue stream, right? Print is very expensive. Shipping is very expensive. And so a lot of the advantages of Kindle apply to this. And so we set about creating this thing that we called Iron Atlas. And it's kind of a game agnostic tool that does exactly what I just described. We've also been looking at doing some simpler apps within that space. For instance, I can't talk about it, but we just landed a major, bigger than I would think, license to do some official dice rollers and other kinds of things. And so there's lots of, in the board game space, in the RPG space, there's lots of, I can't use bad language, forgive me. There's lots of poorly created, hobbyist created tools and apps, and the idea of doing some official ones, possibly as an adjunct to the Iron Atlas system, is something that we also really like. It's a great space that needs apps.
Excellent. And so to crystallize for our listeners, Iron Atlas is kind of an online platform that's a software on your device that you can play these different board games or RPGs or basically things that you would gather around a tabletop to be able to play on a device and display up on a TV. Is that right?
That's pretty much on the... Thank you for reducing my gibberish into coherent English. Yes.
We have heard the dissertation, and then here's the header.
Yeah, and I guess I'd also say that it's also a way that people can have content delivered to them, right? So it's like maybe you can't find a copy of that game, or it's really expensive to buy the $49 or $69 box game of that thing, right? Because it has all miniatures and it's fancy. Maybe you just want to be able to, for a much lower cost, be able to buy a digital version of that, play it, and you know, it's still good for that company because they didn't have to pay for the printing cost. So I actually like that it can kind of help revitalize the industry as well.
I think that's an excellent point because I'm an RPGer by trade, profession, and passion. And you know, I have all of these RPG resources, but really I use a very small percentage of them on a day-to-day basis or on a frequent gaming basis. So if I was able to consume a much broader amount of content for a much reduced price, I think I would move through a lot more content.
Right. And you know, how much does a miniature cost, for instance, right? It's quite expensive these days. So it would be nice to be able to spend, you know, whatever, 99 cents and get 5 tokens of different dwarves or whatever from your favorite artists or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm definitely excited to hear more about this project as it develops. So I know that you guys had a particular path for trying to launch Iron Atlas to start off with. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so the first thing we did is we very carefully, for several years, we had a pretty good year doing some big apps for some major companies last year, and we basically took some of our profits and stuck it into Iron Atlas. We'd actually hoped to have a fully playable prototype out and released, but we didn't quite get there. We were learning Unity, and there were some bumps with that. So, we originally started out doing it in our own sort of toolkit, and halfway through we decided to switch over to Unity. But anyhow, so... Okay. It was a bit of an experiment.
Well, before jumping to that, okay. So what were some challenges that you had on your own tool set that then made you decide to use Unity? Because I think that might be a decision a lot of our listeners would have to make.
It's definitely a tough choice. So, you know, when you want to develop content for mobile devices, you've got a variety of choices now, right? We early on we had done some just, you know, straight low-level stuff using the Apple native tools, and you know, that's great if you're doing a simple app of some kind. But very quickly, one of the very smart programmers that works with us came along with a toolkit that he'd written, and we adopted it and used it on a bunch of products for our clients. It's very low level. It can be adapted for other devices. It's very, very fast. But, you know, most of the higher level stuff needs to be kind of custom created. And
sure.
In some ways, I actually wish that we'd stayed with that because it's very fast. It's very good. we understand it, whatever. However, Unity, gave us a lot of power, and Unity's a little bit bigger, quite a bit bigger of a learning curve, but it gives you that power of being able to cop out stuff on different devices, and eventually that kind of won out.
Excellent. So can you, in one sentence, what is Unity?
Unity is a vast life form from another universe. No, Unity is Unity is a game engine that it's a 3D game engine and toolkit that is unusual because it actually operates a lot more like 3D Studio Max or Maya, or looks like that. So it's very friendly for designers and artists, but it's actually a full game engine with physics and the ability to write code in C# and so on. No one was really sure how it was going to do when it first came out, but it's kind of taken the industry by storm, and it's kind of become the default, especially for mobile development.
Excellent. And I wanted to point that out for our listeners because when we were talking about the development of the game space and some of the game tools that are available, that's making launching your game project a lot easier, Unity will come up a lot. So do some research there and see how it might help your project.
Absolutely. And I'd say for the people who are just learning this stuff, Unity, you can get the free version, and this is a great opportunity to get a fully working tool that you can prototype and play stuff with without having to spend money on it. And then once if you use it for a product, you can choose to spend a little bit of money to get the pro version. So, yeah.
Very cool. So let's jump back into Iron Atlas. So how did you launch that, and what were some of the challenges that you ended up having with it?
Okay, so something like, Iron Atlas is really more of a service, or I should say, if you were going to dissect it, it's 75% service and 25% app. So another message to your readers, to your viewers, listeners, is don't just think that making the app is all you need to do with a software product, right? Depending what it is, there may actually be much more work somewhere else, especially if you're doing something that's like a distribution platform or something like that, like we were. So we were very aware that this wasn't going to be super cheap to do. And so we initially decided to fund a prototype, and we didn't really think it was going to fully do what it was going to do, but a lot of our friends in the business urged us to run a Kickstarter, and we did put an enormous amount of money and effort into the Kickstarter, which was very well received and has got us a lot of attention. However, it did not really get us a lot of money. So it was good for us in a way, sort of disappointing that it didn't fund, but we didn't really think it was the smart thing to do. Why? Because you really need a bigger social media push, or people need to know your brand for the past 5 or 10 years to really, that was the big thing. So a lot of attention came from the Kickstarter, didn't get the cash. It was sort of we're hoping for a lucky strike that we could, quickly raise $100,000 and we wouldn't need to go anywhere else. But we kind of always knew that we were going to need to go somewhere else. And so, that leads me to a point that I've been wanting to make to you, Stephen, which is,
sure,
just like you wouldn't do a product without a project manager. In the old days, it used to be a programmer and artist could do their own thing. But once you get past about 2 people or 3 people, someone's got to be project manager. And on a bigger project, you also need to have your money guy or a strategic guy or girl, right? You need that. Don't try to do a bigger product without that. So that's where we kind of went back to our plan that we thought we were always going to do, which is we've been, this is a business. We're looking to create a revenue stream, and we're looking to raise various types of, equity investment or whatever in order to establish it.
Right. And there's 2 points there I think that I want to make. And the first is with the Kickstarter, and this is something that you'll hear over and over and over. It's part of the business aspect, much more, I would suggest, much more than the product itself. So how do you reach out to your audience, build an audience, build brand recognition before that Kickstarter goes live? It's something very, very important. And, in one way, you need to find a way to feed the trolls on the one side to get attention and hopefully develop those into kind of promoters of your brand before you launch the Kickstarter, so that turns into revenue.
Yeah, and I would say that, we actually did that. We spent a month solid doing that on Facebook. We know a lot of famous people in the publishing industry. We'd already set up, business arrangements with companies like, Green Ronin and Kobold Press and well-known publishers. And they went on about us in videos, and it was really great. But what we really figured out is people needed to know us for several years. And we
Right.
probably needed to run a Twitter campaign for 6 months, right? You need those, 20,000 viewers ready to go with you. So, that's a for sure true thing. Anyhow, so we came back with Iron Atlas back to, treating it like the business that it is. And so we're looking to raise, and we've been working to raise some of this funds in order not only to finish creating the software, but also to do all the work in order to put out the service. We're still optimistic about that. And you can certainly watch the Kickstarter video. It's gotten us a lot of very favorable attention, and it's actually gotten us some other business deals, which I wanted to touch on. So,
yeah, so let me jump in right before you do that, and because I think they'll touch on the second point that I had to make,
sure.
Which will probably lead into that, which is, so the second point was how basically needing to watch the money or watch the business aspect and having somebody look at that project management aspect. So I just wanted to point that out. So how has the Kickstarter then helped move into some other business opportunities, and let you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. So, like I said, we really kind of want to crack this space. We feel like doing the kind of tools that work with board games, space is a strong one, right? Something that doesn't take you away from, let's just say you're a Dungeons and Dragons or a Warhammer player, and you love that stuff. You don't want to go play you might want to go play a video game of that in your spare time, but if you're playing with your friends, you really want some tools that don't take you out of that experience. And so we like the idea of that stuff, and the brands, of course, like it too, right? Everybody likes you to use their stuff. So, Iron Atlas is kind of our big, Godzilla for that market, but we realize that there's quite a few smaller tools that we could do, and I would say that in the app space, people like smaller tools. They don't want to spend $9.99 for some giant toolkit that does a bunch of stuff. They might, but they'd rather spend 99 cents to get like the most incredible character sheet thing, or dice roller, or stat tracker, or whatever. And so we've also kind of parallel to Iron Atlas been developing some of these smaller kind of apps, and in a way working with some very well-known brands to put those out. I can't give you any names right now, but so we feel that also kind of helps develop our soil in a way, right?
Excellent. I'm glad that you pointed that out, because for our listeners out there, I would suggest that the project that you have in your head may be a huge, complicated monster that you're not aware of yet. And when you're starting with the process, focus on what's called the minimum viable product, or MVP. And you can start with a much smaller set of functionality, get feedback on that, usually start to develop some revenue on that can then aggregate into what your whole project is, right?
Very good point, Stephen. Yes.
Yeah, and I point that out because I have, of course, the magnum opus that I'm working on, and a couple of different things, and it involves a card game and an RPG. But oh my gosh, and it's just this huge monster that I know.
Yeah, totally. I actually, in a way, sometimes think that if we did Iron Atlas over again, we should have sort of kept it in that department, right? There's a lot of simpler things. So, do you mind if I just actually touch on a little bit about Iron Atlas so we can make sense of what it does?
Absolutely, do it.
All right, I'm going to try to do the simple version of this. It's actually hard for me talking with just audio and not video. It's really weird. I hope I'm keeping on point, but I find when I'm talking to somebody's face, I can stay on focus a little better. So forgive me if I drift a little bit.
Not a problem.
Anyway, there's roughly 2 or 3 things you can do with Iron Atlas. One, you can make a virtual tabletop, put it up on your TV set. People, whether they're in person or remote, can connect up with any game. Could be, anything we've got licensed in the store, right? So, could be a jigsaw puzzle, could be Dungeons and Dragons, could be a miniature battle game. Doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. 2, there is the store. I want to buy add-on content. I want to buy digital miniatures. I want to buy tokens. I want to buy different things, right? I want to buy upgradable features like a dice pane or whatever. The third thing is the idea that really not a lot of people doing is that you can actually design and generate your own content with the tool. So what I mean by that is, I'm riding on the ferry, or I'm riding on the bus, or I'm on an airplane, I'm going to author my adventure. I'm going to drag and drop monsters and just really quickly drag them onto the map and be able to have a real-time planner. So, for instance, what I was going to say is, I sometimes wish that we had just started Iron Atlas that way. And we still might release like a mini tool that just lets you author content. It's pretty hard with a lot of the existing, PC-based stuff to truly design a nice adventure or set up a battlefield for some sort of, war games or whatever. But our tool does it really, really nicely. And so those are some of the ingredients. And we like the idea of creating a really user-centric, easy-to-use thing that doesn't try to do all the rules or simulate the rules. It just lets you drag and drop stuff and set stuff up the way you would in real life. And I think that's important.
I think that's a really awesome point, and something that we talked a little bit about before is in the RPG, my passion for RPGs, I'm much more interested in story and kind of evocative wallpaper, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't like the squares and I don't like the minis. I think what it does is it kind of can hinder the creativity and imagination of it. So I like just impressionistic kind of things that I would love to be able to make up on a big screen TV to interact with.
Yeah, and maybe have a few sort of like video game style effects, like, oh, look, I cast a fireball, I get a big explosion that's pretty. It's kind of nature of the sort of human monkey mind to want to like, oh, well, how many D6s is that? What about the rules? Does the wall block it? Well, like we say, you know the rules, and you like playing the game because you like playing with the rules yourself. We don't want to do those for you. So why not just give you the pretty visual effect and let you slap that up if you want to show that to your players, for instance, right?
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Oh.
We're coming to the end of our time here, so if you were to condense the advice about how to start your own game studio or some things to think about, what would you tell our listeners?
First of all, make sure that you have all of the disciplines covered. If you don't know something, don't pretend you know it. Go get somebody who's really good at that. So have a robust team. Have a good project manager. Have a good technical person, a good creative person, a good art person, good design person. Some people can wear two hats, right? And a good business person and a money person. Another thing I would tell you is save your money. So when you have profits off of your early products, keep some of it because there's going to be some slow seasons, right? Don't just spend it all on the next thing. And I did have one more really, really good one. I don't know. I had my best advice of all, Stephen, has slipped me. You want to give me a minute to think of what it is, and I'll...
Yeah, it's no problem. It's very easy to edit out silence.
Let's see. We're talking about the composition of the team, and we're talking about having a money person.
Managers? Maybe?
Oh, I know what I was going to say. So I learned this lesson just...
Okay, hold on just a second. So give it a little bit of a silence and then jump into it.
All right, silence. So I learned this lesson from some of the startup community in Seattle. This last year. I mean, as much as I'm 51 years old, and there's some new tricks that I learn occasionally that are a big deal. One of them is that is when you're doing something that's very startup-y, like let's just say 3 of you are working on a product on the weekend, and everybody has jobs, and you're hoping that the product will sell so you can leave your day jobs and go do this. Well, there's a difference between people who work for a small company or studio and people who are the partners. So one of my biggest advices is make sure when you're in that early phase that you have people who want to work on something for equity and really treat those people like a partner. You have to. Don't just get people who are employees and say, well, I'm going to pay you cheap, and can you work on this? I'll give you a percentage. That doesn't count. You have to have an early crew who's sort of willing to act like partners. Go out and get business. They need to be really involved. They need to, work on this thing for free in their spare time until you get it launched. After you have a revenue stream, that is when you can start having paid employees. All right? The reason
Right, and for our listeners out there, equity is basically owning part of the business, right?
That's right. And so, I've gotten burned a lot when I was younger, and so I like to be really, really, really good to people that work for us. So from day one, the moment I never asked for any favors, the moment anybody would, we'd ask anybody to spend hours, they would get paid for that, and they'd get paid a good rate. I'm never cheap, and I'm always good about that. So that's why our employees are pretty loyal to us, right? I don't ask them, could you just work on this for free? I can't afford to pay you or whatever. All right? The problem is you also spend a lot of money developing early products. So what my sort of later in life lesson is develop those products with some people that are willing to work for being a share of a product or a share of a company. Okay? Then differentiate that between the people that you pay to do the work for you, and don't try to sort of mix those streams.
Awesome advice. And to partner with that, I would say when you're talking about having equity partners, spend some money on a lawyer and get everybody's buy-in on that. And this is just my advice from some personal experience. You do want to make sure that everybody understands what they're in it for.
That's right. And make sure the people that you truly trust through and through, as someone wiser than I once said, you can't do a good deal with a bad guy. So basically,
yes.
Any amount of money or any amount of opportunity doesn't replace, I demand honesty and integrity from people, and that's how I operate. And so hopefully you listeners have the same values. Surround yourself with those people.
Awesome. And I know we've talked a little bit about them, but are there any good resources that jump out to you that you could suggest for our listeners to go start researching all of the stuff we've talked about?
Oh, gosh. You can download the Unity game engine for free. Just search, I think it's unity3d.com. Just search Unity and you'll get it. That's cool. Of course, there's lots and lots of videos depending on your discipline. If you want to learn, how to work ZBrush or how to do 3D modeling or how to write code, you can learn that from, thank you to YouTube. If you want to see some of our stuff, you can go to our website, lifeformentertainment.com. I think that's the website. You'd think as the CEO I would know the URL by heart. You can also go to just search Kickstarter and search Iron Atlas, IRON, second word ATLAS, and feel free to reach out if you think some of that stuff's cool. Yeah, those are some resources.
All right. Well, Roger,
I have one more bit of advice. Can I throw it out?
Yeah, please jump in there.
As any of you that are listening as a potential game industry person, you are either a creative person or a smart person, likely both. Creative people and smart people need to work extra hard to stay balanced. So I want to, it's one of the reasons I got out of the console business. I want to emphasize everybody that you'll actually get more done and you'll make more money if you learn how to work on a regular schedule. Don't work on the weekend, sleep at night, get some exercise, and do something for your kind of, what's the word I want? For your inner, to develop your inner world. Do something for relaxation and balance, whether it's exercise or yoga or martial arts, whatever it is. I do all kinds of stuff like that. Very important. It'll actually make your sword sharper for when you're developing games.
That's right. And that speaks to an excellent point of, sometimes when it's tough to chop down the tree, you need to stop and sharpen your axe. That kind of thing. So, it sounds like a great soundbite, and it sounds, yes, like a platitude, but I have just real business experience with this. People burn out, and then they don't come back.
That's right. And so we see studio again and again, our guys, we made everybody work, or the corporation, made everybody work weekends. What we do with that kind of thing is we'll let people work on a weekend or work really long hours for maybe a week or two right before a final deliverable. If you're running your project that way, you're going to burn your people out. You have one shot to do that, basically, right? A couple times a year. That's it. So reserve it for something really special and important and reward people accordingly. Don't expect it.
Absolutely. And once somebody gets heart or head broken, it can take months to come back of doing something completely. Yeah, and so take that very seriously. And, we're talking about, staff, but think about that for yourself, because you can do it to yourself as well. And then you have no dreams or passions to pursue anymore because you just got brain broke.
That's right. Exactly.
Awesome. Roger, this has been an absolute awesome interview. Lots of great content. I really appreciate you spending time with us and sharing your experience.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen.
You've been listening to another edition of the Gaming Careers Podcast. I'm Steve Radusky, your host, and thanks again for joining me. You can find the show notes to this episode at thecompanybar.com/episode 17. There you can get the extended version of this interview, as well as links to the resources that we discussed in the show. Thank you to all the listeners out there that have provided feedback on the show. It's been really exciting to hear from you and hear some new show suggestions that you have for the new year. I'm looking forward to digging into that and seeing which of those I can make happen. I want to apologize quickly for the energy level on both the intro and outro bumper of this episode. I'm not feeling very well today, and I'm on the process of losing my voice, so I wanted to keep the comments to a minimum so that you wouldn't hear that, but I did view it as very important to make sure that I got this podcast out on time. What I find that's happening is I'm really touched and humbled by the kind of interaction that I'm having between the guests that I have on the show and feedback that I have from you listening to the show and giving suggestions about what you'd like to hear. I take that responsibility very seriously, and it's important to me to try to maintain a schedule so that you can come to expect hearing an episode at regular intervals, regardless of how I'm feeling on that day. Now, in the future, I'll try to have some better project planning so that I'm not working up to the last day right before needing to launch, and so illness won't enter into it. So enough of that. I'll see you next time, and I'm sure I'll be feeling better. So until next time, see you soon.